And this probably goes without saying, but I urge you to consider the topics that I'm going to be discussing today as you would a metaphor. For metaphors are, by definition, not saying something that is literally real, but always saying something true. Now, for the sake of orientation, for this talk, there are two things that I need you to know about depth psychology. One, it recognizes that there are psychological forces outside of the ego which come to bear on human development, and that these psychic realities are as real as material reality. The second is it posits that every living thing possesses an instinct towards wholeness and individuation, and that the process by which one individuates is a process of making the unconscious conscious, or building on Aidan's talk from a moment ago, making the cryptic delic. Carl Jung, the father of this discipline, mapped the psyche thus. As we can see, there's a lot more going on than just the presence of simply ego consciousness and unconscious drives. He famously asserted that humans have unlimited reciprocal access to what he dubbed the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is a nonlocal storehouse of those myths and patterns which are so ubiquitous to the human drama as to be considered archetypal, from where we get the term archetype. As more people experience psychedelics, Jung's proposed map of the psyche comes ever clearer into view. Gordon R. Wasson, credited with bringing psilocybin to the West, famously said while under the influence of mushrooms, "I can see the archetypes." Now, perhaps it goes without saying and is a bit redundant, but for the sake of posterity, we can look at the common subjective experiences of a psychedelic journey. And these experiences certainly give the impression that there's something far beyond one's rational consciousness going on when we trip, right? So the most common alterations in phenomenological occurrences are heightened affectivity, emotional expression or catharsis, hallucinations or visions of non-physically present things, a revelation of traumatic memories or repressed psychological content, communication with one's ancestors or family members, mystical experience or spiritual gnosis, self-dissolution, which either comes in the form of body dissolution, physical dissolution, blurring of physical boundaries, or an alteration in the sense of self, seat of awareness. Bizarre nonsensical changes in one's experience of space and time. And finally, entity encounters, or the perception that the being that one is seeing is not a product of a hallucination, but instead something real, which exists in a different dimension or on another plane of reality. What I want to stress in naming these common experiences is that from a Jungian lens, what we're saying is that each of these processes and subjective experiences correlates to something archetypal, that there are archetypes at work beneath the veil of consciousness. And when we decrease the opacity of our consciousness, like Wasson, we see the archetypes. Now, before I get into the archetypes of the hero and the heroine, I want to quickly say something about the difference between change and transformation. As previously stated, depth psychology is interested in the flourishing of human fullness, to become who one truly is, inclusive of all parts, beastly and heroic, dark and light, civilized and wild, sensical and nonsensical, and everything in between is the name of the individuation game. This differs from other psychological disciplines, which seem predominantly interested in the healthy adaptation of the individual to their world, fostering just enough self-awareness to support better functioning in society. Behavior change is the mechanism by which we become more adapted to the external world, and it's employed in an effort to align with societal norms, take action towards goals, and meet external demands. Transformation, on the other hand, is the complete sacrifice of one form to another, as when the acorn is destroyed to become the oak. As opposed to molding one's identity to better fit into the outer world, transformation is a process of becoming what one inherently is. When speaking of the change processes catalyzed by psychedelics or other tools of unconscious access, this distinction is imperative. Psychedelics ought not be considered ego-syntonic or a means to become the person that one wants to be. Instead, we must acknowledge that they often catalyze something simultaneously far weightier and far loftier than a simple behavior change. This is important because, in the words of scholar and mystic Richard Rohr, quote, psychologically and spiritually, there is no such thing as a triumph by force. Domination is domination, not transformation. How you get there determines where you will arrive, end quote. So when it comes to the transformation of consciousness, we must be aware that we are not under the auspices of domination, that is change through force of will, but metamorphosis, which is a natural process over which we have no control, save the freedom to choose either resistance or surrender. Transformation is the metaphorical kin of such archetypal experiences as death, rebirth, initiation, and maturation. While there are many lenses through which we can look at this constellation of archetypes, today we're going to get to know those of the hero and the heroine's journey. As the name suggests, both of these archetypal progressions represent a map or an outline of a process, not a thing. They're meant to be understood as an unfolding, a way of becoming, not an end result, a fixed state, or an idealized goal. And I have to say that despite the seemingly gendered nature of the words hero and heroine, these tropes have nothing to do with biological sex or gender identity. Instead, I suggest that the hero's journey relates to the development of a healthy ego or authentic identity in the world, while the heroine's trajectory maps to the growth and capacity of one's heart and embodiment. As we're all in possession of minds, hearts, and bodies, regardless of our sex or gender identification, both of these journeys are relevant to all of us. The pattern of these processes has been culled from careful examination of myths, fairy tales, and pop culture stories which feature either a hero or a heroine. Instead of double-clicking and zooming in on any single character, these maps speak to what happened to all heroes and all heroines generally. This is what makes them archetypes. They're phenomenologically true regardless of culture or time period. So here are the features of a hero's journey. Right? Yeah. Begins with a departure from one's home or zone of comfort. This leave-taking is often spurred by a call to adventure or a call to action, either from within one's being, such as a longing to see the world or take up a pursuit, or from something outside of oneself, such as an invitation to join a team or start a new job or master a new discipline. If one accepts the call and departs for the unfamiliar, one encounters many things: supernatural aid, crossing of the threshold, initiatory experiences which are often mediated by a wise mentor, trials, an apotheosis or spiritual gnosis, the discovery of a boon, and finally, the return. In modern retellings of the hero's journey, for example, in films like the X-Men series, Top Gun, or The Matrix, we see all of these themes present in various guises. And I can further identify motifs such as discovering an untold power, the discovery of which leads to either self-mastery or self-destruction, and earning the recognition of one's peers. It's important to distinguish that the recognition earned by the hero is that of authentic acknowledgement. So this isn't approval based on performance. It's a genuine seeing of who one is. Now, the heroine's journey, I don't have a map here because I've sort of synthesized the points for the heroine's journey from several different maps, predominantly those that come from Maureen Murdoch, Sharon Blackie, and Kayleen Asbo. So the features of the heroine's journey, it starts in separation, meaning a loss, a break from normalcy, or the involuntary disconnection from one's habitual life. There's typically some kind of abdication or rejection of power, a veiling process or some form of disguise, a visit to the underworld where often a goddess figure or an all-powerful deity is encountered. For those of you that were here for Pascal's talk, the quote that he gave about her encountering a goddess figure on her mushroom journey, relevant. So then there's typically a process of integration or reunion with oneself based on this powerful encounter, reclamation of said power, and then finally a blossoming of community and service based on one's newly or renewly discovered values. In modern heroines' journeys, films such as Kill Bill, V for Vendetta, or Promising Young Woman being good examples, their iterations of this archetype show up in the form of amnesia, deep sleep, or forgetting, like in Kill Bill, the coma, right? Loss of one's voice or ability to speak out, V for Vendetta, when she's imprisoned. Dismemberment, Kill Bill, another good example. Basically an entire movie about dismemberment. And then the subsequent rememberment, right? If we have dismemberment, we need to remember. So remembering and rememberment becomes actually an incredibly crucial part of the psychedelic experience, interestingly, as when we remember the repressed details of our personal traumas, or remember our ancestors and our spiritual lineages, or in profound cases, remember our truest, most nature. So it's true that there is a lot of overlap between these two developmental trajectories, much like there's a lot of psychological overlap between who I know myself to be and what I'm feeling, right? But to facilitate discernment, I want to look at the differences. Firstly, the hero is called to adventure and chooses to leave in pursuit of a higher purpose. The heroine is exiled or involuntarily separated. In the end, the hero's journey facilitates individuality and is often a solitary pursuit based on one's unique nature, whereas the heroine's journey awakens us to the power of the collective and often results in a deeper sense of relatedness, reciprocity, and communitas. Where the hero's journey is about discovering one's purpose, skill acquisition, and authentic alignment with what one does in the world, the heroine's journey is about unlocking a more authentic state of being. The hero's journey asks us, what am I called to do in this lifetime? What are my gifts? And what are my special powers? And how can I best make use of them? What are the skills and teachings that I need? And who are my mentors in order to do that? What is mine, uniquely mine, to offer in service of a more good and beautiful and true world? Questions on the heroine's journey lead us in an entirely different direction. On this journey, we're asked to examine where we are unrelated or out of touch with parts of ourselves, with others, with life, and what we are on this planet to receive. To be in this world means being seen and seeing, means listening to others and being heard, vulnerably allowing our emotional expression, surrendering our domineering will to the larger forces of nature that are within us and without us, and learning to live inside of paradox. The domains which are metaphorically related to the hero are sky, mind, spirit, power, and authority. Conversely, the heroine relates to earth, heart, body, strength, and sovereignty. Now we could look at the difference between these two developmental arcs as the difference between self-mastery and self-acceptance. As the hero, we venture out into the world to learn what we have to offer, test our mettle, and foster confidence through experience. As the heroine, we open up to what's already within us, deepening our capacity to feel, sense, receive, and express ourselves. On the hero's journey, one encounters the concrete. There are limits, standardized assessments, and delineated outcomes. For example, earning a college or graduate degree, writing a research paper with a certain amount of words by a specific deadline, or delivering a talk at a psychedelics conference. These can be confirmed by outside sources alone, which is not to say that they don't have inner correlates. On the heroine's journey, one confronts what is mysterious, abstract. The upper limit is infinity. Within a given moment, confined by the habits of time and space, our inner experience is limitless. Love, joy, presence, gratitude, meaning, grief, rage, sorrow, these can be experienced at an endless depth. So in this realm, we're talking about infinite meaning. And this needs no outside source to be validated. Subjective experience alone suffices. So based on this, I'd like to suggest that the archetype of the hero is related to the dimension of breadth. Breadth of experience, ability, skill set, training, knowledge, acumen, etc. Whereas the heroine in each of us relates to the dimension of depth. Depth of experience, presence, receptivity, impact, embodied knowledge, gnosis, etc. Based on these distinctions, I suggest that the hero's journey correlates to the psychological process of healthy ego development, while the heroine's journey correlates to that of healthy ensoulment. In the psyche, the role of the ego is to mediate between what happens in one's inner world and the demands of the outer world. Without a healthy ego, we're either stunted in our ability to make sense of and express the urges that are happening within us, or else we're too rigidly adapted to the external and thus out of touch with our individuality. Healthy ego is flexible, responsive to both demands of the world and the needs from within. It's also relativized, meaning that it understands its role in relationship to a higher power. The hero's journey facilitates precisely this kind of meaning through a process of bringing one out into the world, humbling one through challenges and unforeseen obstacles, and exposing one to different perspectives and powerful others. The role of the heart, on the other hand, and please remember we're speaking metaphorically, not about pumping blood, is to open one to the depths of one's being, which are the depths of life itself. In Chinese medicine, which is one of the oldest systems on the planet to codify human experience, the word for heart is shen, which translates to original soul. In ancient Egypt, there are two words to distinguish between heart soul, ib, which was considered to be the immortal aspect of one's being, and the heart organ, hati. For those of you that saw Graham Hancock's talk today, we got a little bit more of the mythology of the ancient Egypt relationship to heart, right? So, and we can ask any other kind of mystic, right? A Christian mystic, a Kabbalist, a Sufi devotee, and you'll hear about the heart as the location of spiritual knowing, of gnosis. Leonard Prickard yesterday also was talking about how psychedelics are really about the nature of revealing the heart, right? So this is why I assert that the heroine's journey, which is predominantly related to developing the capacities of one's heart, is a journey of healthy ensoulment. This relationship between heart and soul is well established. When we use psychedelics, we're stepping into our personal hero's journey by answering the call to adventure and accepting the myriad challenges born of said adventure. And we're surrendering to the heroine's journey happening in ourselves by opening to ourselves to the truths that might exist within our own hearts and bodies, be them painful or exalted. So according to Jung, there's nothing inherently good or evil inside any of us. There's only balance and imbalance. A one-sided attitude is the only possible root of evil. This could be too much consciousness in the form of over-identifying with one's ego, rationality, and the outer world, or too much unconsciousness in the form of over-identifying with the contents of one's inner world and thus being poorly adapted to life. Thus, we might say that psychopathy or negative destructive psychological symptoms are a product of imbalance either between the hero and the heroine. For example, an overwrought hero archetype leads to ceaseless striving, hyper-individualism, materialism, hyper-rationality, or originally materialistic worldview, and a compulsion towards constantly trying to prove oneself. An underwrought hero, on the other hand, a diminished hero archetype, might appear as a failure to launch, intractable underwhelm, endless searching for purpose, an inability to commit to a path, and a lack of self-leadership. Too much of the heroine's presence in oneself might look like extreme sensation-seeking behavior, fascination with oblivion in the form of addictive tendencies, or phantanos, non-existent emotional regulation, and poor boundaries. Not enough heroine might show up as cripplingly low self-confidence, a lack of relatedness that leads to transactional, perfunctory interactions with the world, stagnation, monotony, limited emotional bandwidth, etc. Now, ultimately, we know the hero's journey is complete when there's been a return. This might be a homecoming, a re-entry into society or normal life, or participation in your old life in a new way with new status. The completion of the heroine's journey is marked by a resolution. This often takes the form of a reclamation, a retribution, a remembrance, or a memorial. Depth psychology posits the perforce presence of deeper psychological forces at work within each of us. The hero and the heroine are two such forces, operating in our hearts and minds, whether consciously or unconsciously, at all times. Making their journeys conscious allows us to more willingly and courageously step into our transformational processes, whether with or without psychedelics. When navigating these terrains, whether for oneself or in service of another, I think it's important to keep in mind the words of psychonaut John Lennon. Everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. And now, as it seems that, at least for the moment, everything's okay, my talk has come to the end.